Welcome into another episode of Locked On Phillies. And in today's episode, we're breaking down Cristopher Sanchez's 2024 season. And I'm telling you why the Phillies went out of character to do what they did with him. And they nailed it with his contract. We'll discuss on today's episode.
You are Locked On Phillies, your daily Philadelphia Phillies podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, this is Locked On Phillies. I'm your host, Connor Thomas. Thank you so much for joining us today. We come to you as part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. You may know me from some of my other work in the sports talk space. I've been on air at 97.5 The Fanatic doing sports talk radio for 5 years now in Philly. I've been a credentialed Philadelphia Phillies media member for 3 seasons, and this is my 3rd season as the host of Locked On Phillies. Please make sure you're rating and reviewing if you're listening to this in podcast form, letting me and other people know what you think about the show, what we can work on, what we're doing well. Also, please make sure you're subscribing to the YouTube. If you enjoy the content, you want to say thank you. It's the number one way you can do so. And it also gets you notifications when new episodes are posted so you can stay up to date with everything you need to know about the Phillies from our perspective here on Locked On Phillies. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Great time to go ahead and take advantage of Game Time's deals with the Eagles coming back home for a big-time divisional matchup with Washington Thursday night. Go ahead and check them out. But anyway, we're talking Phillies today, of course, as we always are here on Locked On Phillies. And we're going to jump into evaluating Cristopher Sanchez's 2024 season. We're rounding out the guys in the rotation that will be positive evaluations before we get to the guy who was the 5th starter this past year, or tried to be. We're also going to discuss Sanchez's new contract that he receiving a contract extension during the season. Well-deserved, I think well-handled. I'll tell you why it looks so good. And rounding out today's episode, we're going to talk about another young pitcher, Roki Sasaki, coming over from Japan. He's believed to be posted. So will the Phillies make a similar offer to what they did to Yoshinobu Yamamoto last offseason? We will discuss plenty of stuff to get into. But let's start with that Sanchez conversation because he was special in 2024. He was an all-star, which deservedly so. I mean, the Phillies had all-stars up and down the lineup and in the rotation and in the bullpen, but he deserved it. He was very, very good to start the season, much like Ranger Suarez was, much like Zach Wheeler was, and all 3 of those guys end up getting all-star nods. But Cristopher Sanchez finished the season with 31 games started, durable. Remember, we talked about Aaron Nola, the magic number being 32, 31 from Cristopher Sanchez. That's great to see from a guy who had never made more than, he made 18 starts in 2023 and 3 in 2022. He hadn't cleared 100 innings yet, and he threw 181 and 2/3 innings this season. And it didn't seem to bother him too much, the uptick in usage. I mean, you're absolutely looking at a guy that stepped up in a big way for the Philadelphia Phillies. And when Taijuan Walker didn't perform the way you expected him to in the 5th spot in the rotation, well, you needed to find somebody else to say, okay, we're going to carry the weight of this back end of the rotation because you weren't getting it from the 5th spot. And I count the top 3 guys as like the top end of the rotation, at least in the Phillies' perspective. And then the back 2 guys kind of are the survive and advance guys. And Cristopher Sanchez was not a survive and advance guy. He was thriving in the Philadelphia Phillies pitching rotation this year. He threw 2 complete games. Speaks more to his ability to go deep into games and, deep into seasons like we just saw. He had 1 complete game shutout, which was really incredible to see. And, I mean, basically everyone we've talked about in the Phillies starting rotation has had a complete game shutout this past season. And that 3.32 ERA that he posted this year, it's the lowest of his career and the most innings thrown of his career. I mean, just passing the test with flying colors, Cristopher Sanchez. Last year in 2023, he had a 3.44 ERA, a 5.63 in 2022, and a 4.97 in 2021. So he's basically, 2021 to 2022, you had a little bit of an uptick, but he went from 12 innings to 40 innings. Then since 2022, he's lowered his ERA each of the last 2 seasons, and he's increased his innings count significantly each of the last 2 seasons. So you see that and you say, okay, this is a guy at 27 years old. And I do think that people assume Cristopher Sanchez is younger than what he actually is because he only came up in 2021. You didn't see much of him. And you saw a little bit more of him in 2022. But it feels like he's only been up for 2 real seasons. 23. And this past year, you might think, oh, he's 24, he's 25. No, he is 27, but he's got plenty of good years left. And that's why the Philadelphia Phillies felt comfortable signing him to the extension that they did. And we're going to talk about that. And that's more, it is a conversation about Sanchez, but it's more a conversation about the organization and how they're changing their approach. And Cristopher Sanchez is a great case study that gives us the opportunity to talk about that. But I would be remiss talking about Cristopher Sanchez's 11-win, 9-loss, 3.32 ERA season in 2024 if I did not mention the reason he had that season. And it's not velocity, and it's not a curveball, and it's not a fastball. Cristopher Sanchez's changeup is one of, if not the best pitch in baseball. Like it's incredible. Now there are some great pitches out there. There really are. But when you have a pitch that is so dominant, so strikingly clear, you want to know something crazy? This will tell you everything you need to know about Cristopher Sanchez's changeup, which is his go-to out pitch. He is an absolute monster with it. He is just so darn good at setting up that pitch. When I looked up, so what I do to prepare for these episodes is I go to the Players Baseball Reference page. I look through the numbers, refresh myself on the stats, think about the big moments from the season, all of that stuff. And it's easy. You type in Ranger Suarez Baseball Reference, Bryce Harper Baseball Reference, JT Realmuto Baseball Reference, and it always pops up. The second you put that B in at the end of their name, or you get baseball, and the next thing, the immediately populated response is Baseball Reference, which is a website, if you're not familiar, that shows you just like the number, the stats. Basically, it's a stat compilation website. There's another website that's very helpful called Baseball Savant. And Baseball Savant, you'll see screenshots of on social media all the time, talking about exit velocity, and it's got those sliding scales and everything like that, where they're at league average in all of these other factors. Average pitch velocity, breaking ball movement, stuff like that. So it's the more like, oh, let's get into how the numbers are actually happening. And the first person on the 2024 Phillies that I've evaluated this season where Baseball Savant is higher in the suggested responses than Baseball Reference is Cristopher Sanchez. And that's because people are looking at his changeup saying, how in the world is this guy coming out of nowhere and just dominating big-time hitters? And it's because of that pitch. He tunnels it so well. He throws it with such good arm action. You don't want to ever let up a little bit on the arm speed on a changeup because that gives things away to the hitters. It truly is a plus pitch. And there's no reason to believe that he's not going to do one of two things, maybe two of three things. Let's make it. I don't believe there's any reason to think he's not going to continue to improve that pitch. It's already great, but you're going to get more of a feel for it the more you go. He's only 27, so the more he gets confidence in it, the more he starts believing it's one of the best pitches in baseball, the more he starts knowing how to set it up and the way to go. He's also going to get better at the marginal other pitches. Think about the stuff that we've seen Zach Wheeler add and see him add a sinker. See people add cutters at times under Caleb Cotham. The stuff that you can still add to set up that pitch better, I believe Cristopher Sanchez still has more he can add to his repertoire. Maybe he won't add specifically different pitches, but a little tweak to this pitch, a little tweak to that pitch, working on other stuff to set up the changeup better. And the final thing he's going to add is confidence, right? Is you have that season and you look at your Baseball Reference page. If Cristopher Sanchez was sitting down next to me, I was just yo, look at the season you had, man. Do you understand how good that was? He's going to gain confidence from getting a true postseason start for the first time in his career, and he looked damn good. Having the season he had, being an all-star, and being there in Texas and being able to go through that with a bunch of the best players in baseball. This was a huge break. It felt like the breakthrough year for Cristopher Sanchez. And now what matters is what he does with it, but whatever he does, he's going to do so with a shiny new contract extension. We're going to talk about that in a second, but let's hand out some grades for Cristopher Sanchez. Based on expectation, it's really tough because I don't think coming into this season, you know what it was? Coming into this season, everyone was so caught up with Could this be the Ranger Suarez All-Star year? Could this be the Ranger Suarez Cy Young contention year? Because he was finally healthy and everyone was looking at what can Ranger Suarez do above what we normally see him perform at because he's healthy. Cristopher Sanchez went under the radar because of that. And then all of a sudden it was like, oh, wow, it's his breakout year. I'm going to give him an A compared to expectations. I could probably even go A+. But, I mean, the ERA at 3.32, I mean, it's a good mark. It's only 3.4 WAR. He had a couple starts here and there where it was just like, okay, you could tell he's still a young pitcher trying to figure out exactly what he's doing at the major league level. Like there was some inexperience that showed up throughout the season, but he's got an A compared to expectations for me. Now, compared to peers around baseball, I'm going to give him an A-, just a little bit lower. Like the higher letter grade compared to expectations because he was your fourth guy in the rotation, potentially your fifth if you thought Taijuan Walker was going to have a solid season, which he did not. We'll talk about that in tomorrow's episode. But compared to pitchers around baseball, he's still a guy who, like, on any team in baseball, I think he'd be a top 3 guy. Well, yeah, honestly, top 3 guy. If he has that type of season again, I was going to say, well, he was the 4th guy for the Phillies, but he really wasn't. He got the ball game 2 of the postseason series, and then Aaron Nola got 3 on the road. And Cristopher Sanchez ended up being the only guy who won a game or was a starting pitcher where the Philadelphia Phillies ended up winning that contest in the matchup with the New York Mets. So, yeah, he was very good, but it was more how surprising it was than how dominant it was when you look at the league-wide scale. Bottom line, A- is not a bad place to be for Cristopher Sanchez. And neither is the contract situation. So we're going to talk about that coming up. And again, also what it means for the organization that they signed him for the deal he did as we continue today's episode of Locked On Phillies. Let's talk about FanDuel, though, because this is a great time to get in on NFL bets. I mean, you need to get ready to tackle the second half of the NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can bet $5, get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. We got Monday Night Football tonight. Go ahead and check that out. See if there's any money that you want to throw on that. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, maybe you don't get your bet in time before Monday Night Football starts. Don't worry. You can throw something in the middle of the game, halftime, end of the first quarter, whenever. And you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. So Cristopher Sanchez, it kind of came out of nowhere this year, right? Because he was a guy that was under team control, and he wasn't going to be a free agent for a little bit, but eventually he was going to get there. You got to reach that like 5 and change service time or 6 and change service time. We're going to talk about that a little bit later on the episode when it comes to Roki Sasaki. But he was getting to a point where you had to probably start considering paying him. But it was weird that they went for Sanchez and not Ranger Suarez. I talked about that in the episode evaluating Ranger Suarez's 2024 season. You can go back and check that out and hear my theory about why that says Ranger Suarez could be heading towards free agency at the end of next season. But anyway, it was just like a random day in the middle of the season, and all of a sudden it's Cristopher Sanchez extension, and the Philadelphia Phillies signed him through 2028. Right? It was a 4-year, $22.5 million extension for Cristopher Sanchez. So he doesn't have to go to arbitration or anything. He won't be a free agent until 2029. And you've got a team option for 2029, 2030. So it's a deal where he could be locked up for the next 5 years. And that's a really good thing considering you gave Aaron Nola a long-term deal and you gave Zach Wheeler a contract extension. But those guys were proven veteran players. Cristopher Sanchez is not. I can't tell you the last time that the Philadelphia Phillies gave that extension to a young pitcher like that in this type of form, right? Now, the decade-long playoff drought, you didn't really have guys like that in there that you wanted to pay long-term at the pitching position. It was more just like, well, we're going to call up Vince Velasquez and Then we're going to go sign Jake Arrieta, and we're going to use those guys and just try and find call up Zach Eflin. And I'm not like completely knocking those pitchers. I don't think Vince Velasquez is very good. I don't think Jake Arrieta was good here at all. I think Eflin's solid. But the point is, you were getting by calling guys up and by signing some has-beens. And that's part of the reason why the Phillies were unable to compete, and that's Matt Klentak's issue. But that's a conversation for probably 10 years ago at this point. Anyway, now you've got young pitchers that are coming up that are super valuable, that you're developing better, that are in situations where you need to consider paying them. You also have like ace level guys with Wheeler and Nola, and maybe even Ranger Suarez. We'll see what he is. But what the Phillies have not really ever done with pitchers. They did it with Scott Kingery, who's no longer with the team, paid him super early before he ever played at the major league level. But you remember what the Braves always do? They get a guy, he has a good like half a season, and they say, okay, this is an all-star caliber talent. Why don't you take like $6 million over the next 100 years and we own your soul? And you'll get big-time money right now compared to what you're making, and you'll be able to help your family out, and you'll be able to experience life in a way that you have not yet because you are not going to have to go to arbitration anymore. We're going to pay you somewhat of what you're worth. And you want to lock that down in case something goes wrong, injury happens, you start to drop off and play. We'll do that now. And they get great players at a premium because they're willing to offer that early and take a chance. And the Phillies don't do that. They really, really don't. And part of the reason is because they missed so bad on the Scott Kingery thing, and the fan base ripped them. I think they're adverse to putting themselves in a situation like that again. But even with, like, especially with pitchers, we haven't really seen them do this since what? Who was the last young pitcher with the Philadelphia Phillies that got like an extension while they were young? Like Cole Hamels? Is that the last one? I'm trying to think. But this is not a very typical setup for the Philadelphia Phillies to pay Cristopher Sanchez. So why did they do it? Why were they able to go out and say, yeah, we're going to break trend to sign Cristopher Sanchez to this extension well before we need to lock him down at a manageable rate? Well, there's two reasons. One has to deal with the player. One has to deal with the roster. We'll start with the player, right? So Cristopher Sanchez has demonstrated, remember the numbers we ran through. He has increases in count every season at the major league level. This past year, he made 31 starts. That's a pretty darn good indicator of where you want him to be for the rest of his career or the rest of his prime. And if you can get that out of him, maybe 32, 33 starts, get him up to that closer to 200 innings threshold. Like, that's certainly possible, but he's your fourth starter for most of this past season, so I'm not worried about it being at 180 instead. Bottom line is he's durable, right? He's proven that, and he's improved every year. So he is heading in the right direction. He is available. He's a guy that never causes problems, fields the ball well, keeps the ball, like the soft contact for Cristopher Sanchez. That's something we didn't. There's so much good to say about this guy. We didn't even talk about that in evaluating his 2024 season in the first segment. I mean, he was very projectable to what he does is not, he doesn't throw 100. He doesn't have this crazy, like, breaking ball slider that's going to mess up his elbow. Like, changeup's pretty safe for the arm to throw. Like, he has very projectable performance based on the way that he pitches. So that's why they felt comfortable giving him this deal. He is the right guy to do that for. Now, I think Ranger Suarez would not be a bad guy to pay now too, but I wouldn't fit him in the same mold because he's going to be a free agent at the end of this year. Sanchez, they had time. They said, no, we're going to forego the time we have to wait. We'll pay you now. But what else that shows you is the organizational philosophy shift that we knew was going to come. And this is a little bit sad of a topic here. If you like some of the main players on this team, this is the signaling to me, as I look back on it, of the beginning of the end of this era of Philadelphia Phillies baseball. And that's not Bryce Harper, and that's not Trey Turner. It's not some of the young guys, but I'm talking about the JT Realmuto, Nick Castellanos, Kyle Schwarber, like that type of core of players. When you look at what the Phillies are going to have to do, is they're going to, and they may increase payroll this offseason. John Middleton has said he's very comfortable doing that, and I would love to see them do it. Go out and spend more money. Heck yeah, I'm a fan of the team. The more you spend, the better chance you have to win, the more awesome players we get to talk about. It's not my money. Spend it all for all I care. But my point is, at some point, they're going to be hamstrung when this Wheeler extension is fully kicked in and they have to pay some of these guys or pay replacements for the players that you're going to lose. You're just not going to be able to keep throwing $300 million deals at players and your roster becomes a superstar, all-star roster. It already kind of is. But like when Real Muto is gone, you're going to have to find somebody to pay. It's probably going to be a younger player. They're probably going to be expensive. When Kyle Schwarber is gone, you're going to have to find a new DH. Those don't come all that cheap, especially if you want 40-plus home runs of production. And you want another starting right fielder, you're probably going to have to pay him. And those are guys that are all all-star caliber players. So you have to find spots where you can save money. And it seemed like this was the first move of we need to start gambling on players. Not Shohei Ohtani gambling with players, gambling on players to go ahead and get guys on manageable contracts so that when we replace our big name players, we are not completely just strung up by the cap and in the third luxury tax threshold or not cap, you know what I mean? But like the amount of money, the payroll. And when you're in that third luxury tax threshold, you get smoked. So that's what else this Cristopher Sanchez extension. Now, much deserved. And it's not a bad thing that they're handling this way. I actually think it's smart, and I think it's about time they start shifting. But it does make you think, okay, this is where the cost cutting, or rather, they're not cost cutting, right? When I hear cost cutting, I think about companies laying people off. This is more like extreme couponing, where you're starting to go, and it doesn't mean you're poor. It means you're just trying to save money. And that's what the Phillies are trying to do, and that's what they did with Sanchez, and it looks like a great move right now. I hope it's going to continue to be. So as long as they do that in the right way, it's a solid strategy for them to take care of some potential issues coming with payroll. So that's those are, I should say, my thoughts on the Cristopher Sanchez extension. And again, for whatever it means, much deserved. He had a hell of a year, and hopefully more of those to come. Coming up, we're going to talk a little bit, and we'll do a deeper dive on this guy later on in the offseason as we get more information. But there's another great pitcher out of Japan coming available. What do you need to know about the Roki Sasaki sweepstakes? We'll talk about it coming up next as we wrap up today's episode. But let's talk about game time first, because I know you want to go to the games. You want to be there in person. Do you know how much more it means when you witness things with your own eyes, live and in person in the building? Whether it's comedy, concerts, theater, maybe it's football, basketball, baseball when the season rolls back around, hockey, all of this great stuff that you could see with your own eyes. If you're in a city like me or close to one, it's super easy. It's right down the street. But how do you get the tickets? Oh, Game Time. And how do you get the right tickets? Game Time Picks. Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets to see your favorite teams play live even easier. It filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. I mean, they've got curation that makes it super easy to save more on sports, concerts, comedy, theater, all kinds of stuff that you want to go to. The all-in pricing feature shows your total up front. With no surprise fees at checkout, you get views from your seat, a panoramic view before you buy the tickets, and you get the game time guarantee, which means they'll credit you 110% of the difference if you find seats in the same row and section for less, and your tickets covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time Picks. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. All right, so what do you need to know about Roki Sasaki? Who is this guy? What's going on? How can you possibly expect the Philadelphia Phillies to take a run at him? Now, Roki Sasaki, what you have to do is you have to be posted by your team. He plays in the it's the NBL, the Nippon Professional Baseball League or whatever. But he plays over in Japan, same league that Shohei Ohtani came from, same league that Yoshinobu Yamamoto came from, same league that all of these guys from Japan that are coming over that are like making waves in the sport of baseball here in the United States. Same spot he's coming from. He's 23 years old, and he's a guy that you're looking at. The numbers for him are incredible. He's just right-handed starting pitcher. He has thrown 414 and 2/3 professional innings. He has 524 strikeouts, 91 walks, a 2.02 ERA. This is from 2021 to 2024 over there in Japan. So, I mean, just to break it down to begin with, 524 Ks and 414 and 2/3 innings, only 91 walks, command, stuff, a 2.02 ERA. That's incredible. And that's why at 23 years old, there are going to be a lot of teams interested in Roki Sasaki. And all the reports are he's going to be posted. He's going to be available in free agency to sign with the team. And I don't know. We'll have to do a deeper breakdown of will the Phillies be interested? Should they make an offer? Now, remember, last offseason when Yoshinobu Yamamoto was available, the Phillies went and they offered a sizable competitive contract. He never really seemed interested, so it wasn't ever a conversation of like, oh, they almost had him. But the fact that they were willing to offer that is proof positive that they're starting to explore more the Japanese market for player development. And they should, because I don't know if you noticed the players on the Dodgers this year, but Shohei Ohtani and Yoshinobu Yamamoto were big parts of the reason why the Dodgers won that whole World Series thing. And they're darn good players, and having players on your team like that make you better. So I would like for the Phillies to pursue Sasaki, and we'll talk about how they would go about doing this. But this is more just like the brief, what do you need to know about the guy? Like, who is he? Where does he come from? What does he do? And why is he so sought after? Well, the numbers are why he's so sought after, but not just that. Now, there's a rule when you're bringing in international players that have played professionally in another country. And this is players younger than the age of 25 who have not reached 6 years of service time in a foreign major league. So, for example, the Japanese professional baseball setup. If they have not played for 6 years of time in that league, they are subject to Major League Baseball's international amateur signing bonus pool rules, which means basically they can't be signed to a major league contract. They could be signed to a minor league contract, but the limits on that dollar amount wise are significant. And what that means is he's got to be cheap compared to what he should be. He's not going to get the mega $700 million Shohei Ohtani deal. He's not going to get the Yoshinobu Yamamoto $300 million, whatever he got. Remember when Shohei came over, he technically signed a minor league deal with the Los Angeles Angels. And if he doesn't play a single game in the minors, Sasaki. So if they sign him to this minor league deal and they move him up to the majors, you're going to get I think it's 4 or 5 years of team control on a very manageable contract situation or arbitration. So yeah, that's why he's so sought after, because you don't have to pay him $800 billion to come over and pitch. You don't have to Shohei Ohtani him. You don't have to Yamamoto him. You can get him for a really, really manageable dollar amount. And that could be a major boost to a team that needs help in the pitching rotation. Now, think about it, right? You might say, well, where does he fit? Because you already have 4 guys, and I want to see what Painter does in the 5th spot. Taijuan Walker stinks, but if Andrew Painter's going to throw some innings, how exactly does this work? Well, we talked in Ranger Suarez's episode, the Evaluating Ranger Suarez, which is my most recent one. You can go ahead and check it out. We talked in that episode about how I think Ranger Suarez is going to get to free agency without signing an extension with the Philadelphia Phillies. I don't think he'll be traded, but I do think he will get to free agency without signing an extension. And maybe they re-sign him. But let's say they don't, right? And Andrew Painter is still coming off that Tommy John surgery recovery. He's not ready to go out and throw 200 innings at the major league level. He's never pitched at the major league level. So what if this year you go ahead and you sign Roki Sasaki and your rotation is Wheeler, Nola, Suarez, Sanchez, Sasaki, and those are your 5 guys. And as you work through some stuff, Andrew Painter is the guy that comes up and gets opportunities when guys go down, when guys need a break, if someone gets dead arm, if someone gets injured, we know it's going to happen. He's your first guy to call up. You start him in the minors, you work him on a pitch count, and you get him into major league games sparingly. And then after this coming season, when Ranger Suarez hits free agency, if Sasaki looks awesome, you say, Ranger, we love you. You're an awesome player. I almost got choked up there. You were a huge part of everything we started here when we got back into the postseason, but we have Sasaki, we have Painter, we've got some young guys that are going to round out this rotation. We got Wheeler, Nola, Sanchez locked down, and that's your rotation going forward is Wheeler, Nola, Sanchez, Sasaki, Painter. That sounds pretty darn good to me. Now, I don't know if the Phillies will do it. I don't know if they're going to go out there and make a competitive enough offer, and I don't know if Sasaki's interested in playing for the Phillies. That's something that we're going to have an episode about as more information comes out on what his wants and needs are. But there is a world where the Phillies have shown interest in a similar player. The player fits the mold for what the Phillies need in the future. So that's a simple equation to say, yeah, they should be in on him. We'll see if they are. That's all for today's episode of Locked On Phillies. Thank you so much for joining us. We got one more spot in the rotation to go when it comes to evaluating 2024 seasons, and this one's going to be, I'm going to try and be nice, but Taijuan Walker is the last guy we talk about in the rotation. It's not going to go great for him in the evaluation process. We'll discuss on the next episode. But again, that's all for this one. One more time, I'll remind you, we're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Please make sure you're rating, reviewing, subscribing to the YouTube, all that great stuff that helps us out and gets you notifications when new episodes are posted. And I'll talk to you tomorrow for the roast of Taijuan Walker, I suppose, on the next episode of Locked On Phillies.